I want to go to my guest. He has written a fantastic article, and I want to get to that article. Klarenberg, welcome to the show, my man. Journalist, author. You have written a fantastic piece, and I'm going to show the audience that piece. Let me pull it up. I put it on my own site to pull up. I went through it this morning when I had the opportunity, and I agree with you. And by the way, not just agree with you. The first time where Donald Trump was the guy tried to whack Trump, tried to effectively assassinate Trump. My thought was, how did he get into the country? He clearly had ties to Ukraine in some way that were not being elucidated, explored. They didn't seem to care about it. And they fully ignored it. It was weird. Okay, I need to pull that article up. For whatever reason, it didn't translate, but I will pull it up. Go into it for me. You make the argument. Here we are. Did Ukraine, I'll just pull it up for you so people can see it for themselves. Did Ukraine intel attempt a Trump assassination? And you are talking about Nikita Kaspa. This was the teenager that murdered his parents, like just a shocking murder. And in the news, it was like he wanted to murder Trump. But the news portrayed this as kind of like, okay, this kid is deranged in some way, because of course, this random kid is not going to assassinate the president. And your point is, yeah, that's one way to look at it. But you guys didn't really look at the affidavits and look at what he has been saying, especially in the conversations he's been having on Telegram. You just kind of blew that off, that he had Ukrainian contacts. He was contacting a Russian number, Ukrainian number. And in communications on Telegram, saying some pretty explosive things about how he was going to go about doing it, using drones and whatnot, being directed to kill his parents. This was a fascinating read. And considering what Trump is doing now, it's really shocking that a country that has been embroiled in a war, losing that war, especially after being goosed on by the U.S., would try to find somebody to do something like that. Go into this for us, because this was a really good piece. And I'm going to put this at the bottom of the video so people can see it. Global Trade, by the way, is the website.
Thank you very much for your kind words, Jamal. Yeah, I mean, I think that the key thing that really that kind of got me into this, I think, was the fact that the media was completely obsessed with this for weeks. I believe that he was arrested at the end of March, and for until Easter, like pretty much every day there was coverage of this. This included extensive investigative timelines of how the police found his parents dead, how they tracked him down and caught him, psychological profiles speculating on why he may have sought to assassinate the president, his political views, his mental state, all sorts of fear-mongering about how, well, if Trump keeps these federal funding cuts up, he could put himself in further danger of more assassination plots, etc. And then, absent from all of this, and I would challenge your viewers to find a single mainstream article that mentions in any detail or even mentions at all the fact that he wasn't this insane neo-Nazi lone wolf, as he is widely portrayed, but he was clearly being directed in what he was doing by individuals unknown on Telegram, often speaking in Cyrillic text with Ukrainian telephone numbers. And it must also be noted that his method for attempting to, as you mentioned, to kill Trump was to try and use a drone equipped with explosives or poison. This is Ukraine's weapon of choice in the war with Russia. They have innovated in the field to a significant extent and changed the face of modern warfare forever in the process. Now, to the extent that his foreign contacts were mentioned at all, there was a lot of focus on the fact that, some one of the people he was speaking to spoke Russian, or that he boasted to his classmate, or at least one classmate of his, that he was in contact with people in Russia and was plotting to kill the president. Now, what's not noted and is laid out very clearly in the affidavit is he not only expected to be extracted to Kiev after successfully taking out Trump, and asked numerous questions about, well, will I be able to live a normal life there? Will I be able to get a job, etc.? Which does tend to suggest that he wasn't just in contact with some random Ukrainian citizens. He was in contact with people with state connections or operating at some kind of state level. Given a new identity perhaps or whatnot. But also he asked specifically one of his confederates, or you might even call them handlers, what country do you think will get blamed for this? And they responded, Russia will be blamed for it. This is the goal. Now, when you bear in mind that his contacts with these people seem to have started around the time that Trump won the election in November last year, and continue, and there was fevered speculation that Trump was going to make good on his pledge to end the war in Ukraine within 24 hours of taking office, which has been, rather forgotten. The linkages are so clear and they're writ so large that only by deliberately ignoring them, there's clearly been a concerted decision made to simply not mention this. Now, if you were to say compare what happened when Ryan Ruth, he was another would-be Trump assassin, who he sought to join the Ukrainian armed forces. He sought to recruit foreign fighters for the effort. He took photos of himself in DC and Kiev, saying that he was, trying to rescue Ukraine, etc. The media acknowledged this, but they were really keen to play these connections down and say that he was just this delusional wannabe. He was too old to fight. He wasn't able to rustle up any support for Ukraine. He couldn't recruit anyone. Blah blah blah. They're not even trying to downplay. The media is not even trying to downplay links these times. They're just not mentioning them. Which is, really, it's sinister, and I do think that it speaks to some degree of coordination. Now, I might add as well that it's been rather forgotten now, but in May 2024, you have the Prime Minister of Slovakia, Robert Fico, who was elected on a very popular platform of ending his country's support for the proxy war, ending all financial and military aid to Kiev, and ending Russian sanctions. These are positions that were held by the overwhelming majority of Slovak citizens. And I might add that polls show that Slovakians overwhelmingly blame the US and NATO for the war, not Russia. And he was shot but at a public appearance. Got gut shot repeatedly. It's a miracle that he's still alive. And his would-be assassin was a Ukrainian ultra who explicitly has stated that his motivation was Fico's quote-unquote pro-Russia, anti-Ukraine stance. Now, questions abound as to whether his shooter had international connections. This was something that Slovakian police were apparently very interested in, not least because the shooter's Facebook profile was deleted 2 hours after the shooting while he was in custody. So, whether he was in touch with people in Ukraine, and if so, who they were, remain kind of open questions now. But quite clearly, as support for ending this nightmare in Ukraine is gaining ground, and there are indications from US officials that they just want done with this. It stands to reason that there are going to be people in Ukraine, and I've been warning about this for a very long time, who will have an axe to grind with the West. Now, for the time being, this seems to have translated into attempted or plotted assassinations against anti-war leaders. I think that once the conflict's over, this could translate into mass casualty attacks on average citizens of Western countries who are perceived by Ukrainians as having betrayed them.
Yeah. Well, I want to read a piece that you pointed out. And it says, let me share it. Because you're right, it's damning. How do you ignore this? And even the Dylan Roof thing, it's like, how did he get into the country with the links that he had to Ukraine? And they just kind of ignored the links that he had to Ukraine. Right here, how long would I need to hide before I would be moved to Ukraine? He inquired, adding, I probably should brush up on Russian. He further asked, so while in Ukraine, I'll be able to get a normal job, have a normal life, even if when it is found out. I did it. In an event, more revealing exchange in January, Kaspa asked an, quote, unknown Confederate, what country do you think will get blamed for this? They stated. He's having these conversations with a Ukrainian phone number. And the FBI is like, coincidence, not important, not a factor. The media is like, no big deal. And to your point, the president is literally in the process of ending the war, deriding Zelensky as we speak. Like Marco Rubio and Witkoff have blown off the trip to London as a direct result of Zelensky effectively saying, I'm not making any of these agreements that you guys are coming up with. I wasn't discussed. Then he's freaking out, effectively pissed off. And you can imagine that there's a lot of, there are neo-Nazis in Ukraine. I mean, I think they're called Banderites, but whatever, fascists, right? These people have been killing and dying for 3 years. Do we really think it's shocking that one of them, more than one, would try to take the life of somebody who is trying to end that war? And that they may consider the fact that they're ending it a complete betrayal, especially if they come to the conclusion that they were led into it by the US. Like I want to show you something. One of the interesting things that came out was they are really hitting this hammer that Ukraine is not going to be part of NATO. Ukraine is not going to be part of NATO. Listen to, I believe this is Kellogg. Listen to what he says here. And I want to show something else because these two things are related. He comes out and says this. Like he's nailing it down. And he has to nail it down because he's trying to get a deal. And if Russia even believes that there's going to be a whiff of NATO later on, no deal. Listen to what he says.
Let me give you one example. NATO's off the table. You're not going to be part of NATO. That's something that's not new. We've been talking about that since 2008 when Ambassador Burns told Condoleezza Rice this was I wrote about it in 2013. But there's workarounds. There's workarounds you could do and workarounds you can work. So you don't want to start with a problem, throw it out there, and there's no solution to it.
Okay, so he said, well, I said this in 2008. Okay, the problem with that is the Bucharest Summit. Bucharest Summit in 2008. This is NATO's website. NATO welcomes Ukraine and Georgia's Euro alliance aspirations for membership in NATO. We agreed today that these countries will be part of members of NATO. Both nations have the valuable contributions to the alliance operations. Well, yeah, they're on the border of Russia. No wonder. We welcome the democratic reforms in Ukraine and Georgia and look forward to free and fair parliamentary elections in Georgia in May. This is the next step for Ukraine and Georgia on their direct way to membership. Today, we make clear that we support these countries' applications to MAP. Therefore, we will now begin a period of intensive engagement with both a high political level to address the questions still outstanding pertaining to their MAP applications. We have asked the foreign ministers, blah, blah, blah. Effectively, the notion of you guys being in NATO, that is fantastic. We're welcoming you into NATO. And you get the Burns memo pointing out, dude, you're going to create a civil war. Kellogg is like, oh no, this wasn't the case. You know, we said this was a bridge too far. NATO didn't say it was a bridge too far. NATO is effectively offering these guys membership. If you are a neo-Nazi in Ukraine, you are a radical in Ukraine, or just far-right person, and you know that, meaning you know you were offered membership. You know you were pushed with this idea of membership, as if you go in this particular direction, NATO is somehow going to get involved either de facto or that they're going to bring you in. And you hear, you're never going to be part of NATO. We're pulling out. We're done. You heard Joe Biden for 3 years. We're with you for as long as it takes. And now, all of a sudden, as long as it takes has come. What is in your mind in that moment? Is that a betrayal? I would say yes. They may say yes. And what do you do when you've been, you might have lost 800,000 people in that situation, being pushed into this direction with the U.S. basically abandoning you? I guess my point is I'm agreeing with you. I'm saying that is not an irrational take. That is a rational take. Is it a rational act to try to kill a president to keep the war going, or just out of anger? That's the question, right? The FBI should have looked into it, though. And I agree with you, it is weird, bizarre that they did not. They dropped the angle. And by the way, the media didn't cover this angle either.
I think that on the subject of the media ignoring inconvenient facts as well. I mean, contained in the FBI affidavit are excerpts from Nikita Kassap's manifesto, which is it's called "Hail the White Race, Hail Hitler." really charming guy, it makes repeated references to Atomwaffen. They broke up, but it was this neo-Nazi terror group based in the US. And he states there is much to learn from the success and mistakes of Atomwaffen, and he directs people to their teachings on the use of violence to achieve political ends. Now, this is another kind of tangential but also significant link to Ukraine, because Atomwaffen had an intimate relationship with Azov Battalion, which is this openly neo-Nazi Ukrainian military regiment, which has received Western funding and training and weaponry. I might add, from Trump was the president who lifted restrictions on the supply of lethal aid to groups like Azov in Ukraine. Now, Atomwaffen, its founder is an individual called John Cameron Denton, who's basically spent most of his adult life in and out of prison for a variety of absolutely heinous crimes. His most recent indictment was in February 2023, when he was found to have been plotting to destroy electoral substations in the city of Baltimore, Maryland, which is a majority black city, of course. And his objective was to deprive citizens of heat and light during winter, which is often very harsh there. So the misery and death that would have been caused by this would have been substantial. Now, this occurred at a time when the Biden administration was routinely warning of the grave threat of racially or ethnically motivated domestic terrorism in the US, and it published a dedicated national security strategy to address the challenge. And then yet the indictment for precisely such a racially or ethnically motivated terrorist attack, it got virtually no news coverage. US officials had nothing to say about it. And you do have to wonder whether that's because of Atomwaffen's relationship with Azov. Because as we've seen, since the proxy war erupted, the media that previously did discuss with some degree of honesty the fact that Azov was openly neo-Nazi and founded by an individual who wanted to preserve the white race and saw it as the battalion's core objective. Azov hosted members of Atomwaffen in Kiev. They attended Azov events, including this neo-Nazi black metal festival, which is annually held in a state-owned venue. So again, you have to ask yourself, was this not picked up upon because of that relationship, and whether it would raise very serious questions about precisely who and what the US and other Western countries, in particular Britain, have been supporting in Ukraine since the Maidan coup in 2014. Yes, Azov has explicitly sought to foment, maybe that's the wrong word, but construct relationships with other groups overseas. There was in November 2022, there was an Italian neo-Nazi cell that was busted for planning to carry out mass casualty attacks I believe it was in Naples, and then among their number were people who had fought in Ukraine. There was a British Parliament has something called the Security and Intelligence Committee, which is supposedly meant to vet the work and activities of MI5 and MI6, which are Britain's domestic and foreign spying agencies. And then in 2022, it published a report stating that there was an extremely high risk of British mercenaries who had returned from country redacted engaging in right-wing terrorism, and that their experience fighting in country redacted might have further radicalized them, made them more prone to violence, and meant they will have developed connections with others who share their ideology. I wonder what country redacted was, and I might add as well that the committee report adds that currently there is no formal process for monitoring these individuals once they return from Ukraine. And there has been no acknowledgement in the media of this potential problem since then. In the lead up to 9/11, which was carried out by veterans of US proxy wars in the former Yugoslavia, there were people within the US intelligence community who were saying every warning light is blinking red for a major terrorist attack on US soil. The same is true now, but there is a deathly silence on this as the war kind of seemingly grinds to a conclusion. I mean, today we've just heard that Rubio and Witkoff have pulled out of a meeting in London, and Witkoff is, which was meant to be about discussing a ceasefire or peace plan for Ukraine, and that Witkoff will still be heading to Russia, which is, a clear indication that from the US's perspective, this is over. European powers seemingly maintain delusions of keeping this going, but they lack the muscle and the wealth and the ammunition to do this without US assistance.
No, you're absolutely right. I guess my thing is, we've had guests on the show that pointed out that at the end of this war, that there are going to be a lot of radicalized people, a lot of soldiers that think they were betrayed, and they're in Europe, right? I mean, we've ignored it for so long because from our point of view, you're fighting the Russians. We have no issue with that. That's what we want. We want you to fight the Russians. We want you to have that war. What happens when the war ends? Then what? You're in, I think you're in the UK. Has there been any provisions that you're aware of in Europe at all that has paid attention to this at all? Like, I know you said that for the most part, we've kind of just ignored this. And I know, like you said, some people are pointing out, hey, dude, this is going to be an issue. But governments haven't accommodated this. They've just kind of, because I can tell you in the US, they was like, there are no Nazis in Ukraine. And mind you, this is after months of stories, flag burning ceremonies, Democrats sending letters saying, hey, this is an issue. Americans are going over to get training by Azov battalion and coming back radicalized. And then when the war started, there are no Nazis in Ukraine. Zelensky's Jewish. We have no idea what you guys are talking about. Did Europe take the same tact with that, where they just completely ignored that issue entirely? And governments right now are ignoring. I guess the answer is yes. I guess this is a big question. The answer has to be yes, right? They're fighting a war, and Europe doesn't accept the U.S. position on the war. Oh, that is going to be a tragedy, per se. Wow.
Lots to look forward to, I think. I think that I mentioned the proxy wars in the former Yugoslavia. I think that's very much worthy of consideration and examination, in this context, because I have frequently called attention to the fact that the war in Bosnia, which was just one of the proxy conflicts in the region, the CIA and MI6, via rat lines, inserted a lot of Mujahideen fighters into the country to assist their Bosniak Slavic Muslim proxies. And when the US encouraged the Bosnian leadership to reject every peace deal put in front of them and to take a completely intransigent approach in peace negotiations and not make any concessions. And then in 1995, late 1995, when the US got bored of this and they decided they wanted it over, they turned around and they foisted a very, very inequitable peace on Bosnia and said, well, if you don't, you have to accept this, and if you don't, then well, we're going to pull all support for you and leave you at the mercy of your enemies. So, I mean, that created a lot of bitterness locally. But I mean, under the terms of that agreement, the Mujahideen had to leave, and they were sent scattering. Some of their leadership were assassinated by forces unknown within the country, probably at CIA and MI6 direction. Now, their leadership, which included Osama bin Laden, were extremely angry about this, and it led to bin Laden's jihad on America, which, as I mentioned, one way or another led to 9/11. The same mistakes are being, if you even call them mistakes, are being repeated over and over and over again without any consideration for the consequences. I think in the US, you are somewhat insulated from this by the vast oceans surrounding you. But in Europe, I think this is going to be a real problem. I mean, and you even had Zelensky in an interview with the Economist, I believe it was in 2023, where he as good as made this threat openly when he said, there's a lot of Ukrainian refugees across Europe, and so far they've been well behaved. But if you were to turn your back on us, that might change. So they have created, as has happened so many times in the past, the Western countries have created a monster which they are now incapable of reining in, and is willing to go off script, as it were, and disobey orders. I mean, that was the New York Times recently published an expose on the extent of American support for the war in Ukraine, much of which will be no surprise to anyone who has actually been following this at all seriously, i.e. ignoring the mainstream media reporting on the proxy war. But it explicitly stated that the New York Times explicitly stated over and again that there were several examples of the Ukrainians doing things they had been told not to do or warned not to do. The idea that if you cut support, that's going to do anything apart from encourage them to do more things that you don't want them to do. And I do wonder whether there is an element in Europe, I mentioned Europe, this insane European determination to keep this irretrievably unwinnable quagmire going, that they worry about that on some level, even if they're not mentioning it publicly, they worry about the blowback from this. There have been numerous completely insane plans mooted for keeping this going. There was a few weeks back a plan called Sky Shield was floated, which would see Western fighter jets sent to police the skies of Ukraine and shoot down Russian missiles. But it wouldn't be a NATO deployment; it would be European countries doing this independently. This is despite the fact that Russia has clearly said on many occasions that this would make European countries formal belligerents in the war. There was talk recently, again, all roads lead to London, by British officials of sending an unconventional peacekeeping force that wouldn't actually be there to enforce a peace. It would be there to fight formally alongside the Ukrainians and prevent further Russian advances. I mean, this is madness, not only from the perspective of just escalation and this risking becoming all-out hot war between NATO and Russia, but also, like, the countries proposing this, they don't have for the most part have militaries worth speaking of
to do it. Right.
I mean, Britain has 70,000 soldiers in its military. It can't meet recruitment numbers. If you look at the ratio of casualties on the front line in Donbass, I mean, I think there was recently a casualty exchange where Ukraine gave Russia 40 slain Russian soldiers in return for 920 killed Ukrainian soldiers. And if you think that's excuse me, that was just one casualty exchange. I mean, the Europe is comprised of militaries that would last, if in the event of a all-out shooting war with Russia, it'd last a few weeks.
Yeah.
At most.
Can you explain that to me? Like, Joe Biden was insane on this issue. And when Trump came in, he was like, look, we're done. We're sick of this. We don't want to deal with this. And for the longest time, the belief was that America was in the driver's seat, that America was the one that was driving this, especially with Joe Biden behind the bus. And when America pulled out, Europe, who often is considered to be, I don't want to say lapdogs, but kind of lapdogs of America in regards to that foreign policy, they wanted to keep going. They didn't want to stop. As you pointed out, they were trying all of these ideas. Oh, we're going to put our militaries in. We're going to fly jets. And maybe this was a bit of bluster in order to kill any kind of deal that Trump was ever going to come up with. Because after all, if you're doing that, Russia's not going to accept the deal under those terms. Why this level of vigilance by Europe on this front? Like, is it that they've just internalized the narratives that they've ran with? Is it just they actually are terrified of the Russians in this way? Like, I can't wrap my head around what is going on in the European leadership that they're so adamant about keeping this going. And I'm of mind to believe that what they want is a guerrilla war. Like, they're of mind that Ukraine is lost. Russia's forced Russia to take it all. And in the manpower that they're going to have to expend to take it all, or at the very least collapse the Ukrainian military, they're going to have to deal with the West Ukraine that is rabid, in which case they can support a guerrilla war. Otherwise, I don't know what they're doing. It just seems like complete delusion to me. Can you, on some level, explain this to me?
Yeah, well, on top of, I think, yes, well-founded fears of blowback if they draw back from this, which is just preventing them from taking the L in Ukraine. I think that there's also that there is enduring delusions about Europe's power. So I wrote another piece on my website, shameless plug, sorry about that. Called NATO is Dead. Now, this was a quote from an individual tied to, there's an elite British defence think tank, Chatham House, which is basically funded by the British government and is an elite talking shop for military and intelligence apparatchiks. He gave an interview in March to Bloomberg where he said, well, look, it's clear that NATO is dead. We can't rely on the Americans. We need to focus on our own defense. We need to beef up our own security, our own militaries, and we need to start acting as independent military powers. Now, despite the fact that he stated we can't depend on the Americans anymore, within minutes of making all this bold proclamation that NATO is dead, he then said, oh, well, actually, we do have to depend on the Americans for weapons because we don't have the industrial capacity or the resources to make our own, right? So he, Chatham House apparatchik, he suggested, well, we're a lot richer than Russia. So, we can pool our cash together and just buy all the weapons we need from the Americans. Now, there are two major problems with this view. And I've seen a lot of people make this point that Russia's GDP is tiny compared to Italy, say. The point is that, Russia has all the natural resources one could possibly want under its soil. It has extensive industrial capacity to the point that it can make millions of shells, artillery shells, annually. Germany struggles to make 100,000 a year. In no small part because it's deindustrialized itself by sanctioning its supply of Russian energy, which was key to its economy. There's that aspect to it. But it also, GDP on paper is basically just now an irrelevant metric because Europe's economies are based on services, stuff like advertising, marketing, PR, management, consulting. You can print money, but you can't print soldiers and bullets and tanks. And this is still somewhat lost on European leaders. But moreover, I think that one of the reasons that the Trump administration is so keen to get out of this, it's not because of any particular liking for peace or an aversion to overseas conflict. It's because the US can't keep this going any longer. Now, there was a little notice report in July 2024 from RAND, which is this Pentagon-funded think tank and is very influential. It concluded that America's stockpiles of key ammunition, military vehicles, and weaponry are already kind of bottom of the barrel levels, and America's defense industrial base has been hollowed out via offshoring and outsourcing to such an extent that it cannot at any pace or scale replenish what's already been sent to Ukraine, and it can't even ensure that it can't even meet its own equipment, technology, and munition needs, let alone any of its allies. So if Europe's big grand genius plan is to buy is to just print a ton of money to buy American weaponry, well, there might not be that much to purchase in the first place. Yeah. So I mean, I do think that yes, that that for a very long time, and we've just also today, I believe, like Politico published this article on. Called the U.S. cavalry isn't coming, and it along the way it notes that that Europe doesn't actually have very much in the way of independent military capabilities whatsoever. Like it doesn't, all of its equipment is is supplied anyway. And it is dependent on the US to service, repair, and maintain what weapons it does have. Now, I mean, if the US could very easily, and I don't think this is outside the realms of possibility, choose to pull the rug out from that. I mean, Trump is continuing, just as he did in his first term, to make a lot of noise about how that Europe needs to fund its own defense and needs to increase its defense spending significantly. They don't have the capabilities, and I think that there has been an assumption for a very long time that the US will always just be there to protect us and arm us, so we don't have to think about that. And it's only now, more than 3 years into this nightmare, that they're getting to grips with this reality. But even then, delusion endures somehow.
Wow. Kit, fantastic article, man. Fantastic article. I think you're right. I think what you call it, sinister, definitely intentional, where they seem to be leaving this out. I don't know if it's night blindness. I don't know if it's we're with Ukraine for as long as it takes, so we ignore excesses like, trying to whack the president. I don't know what it is, but they seem to have completely ignored this angle twice in regards to somebody who's tried to take the life of Trump, or at the very least wanted to take the life of Trump. Kit Klarenberg, check him out. Investigative journalist documenting the role of intelligence services in shaping politics and perceptions. And Kit, what outlets? You're with Grayzone UK and you're with Global Dissidents. Global Dissidents is your site. This is the one that the article is published on, correct?
Yeah, Global Delinquents. That's my website. But you can also find my writing at the Cradle and Mint Press and Al Mayadeen too. So see you there. Thanks for having me on.
Oh man, oh, anytime you want. Thanks, man. Really good article. Thank you. Have a good one, man.
God bless you.
I did not mean to cut him off early. I am sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah, good.